Imagine watching your home burn, not because help never came, but because those meant to protect your neighborhood stood in the way. Imagine a warm summer evening in a quiet suburban neighborhood. Families gathered on porches, children ran across lawns, and the air carried the soft hum of sprinklers. In the middle of this peaceful scene stood Mr. Daniels, a proud black homeowner in his mid-40s, who had worked tirelessly for decades to buy the house his family now called home. It wasn't just a building, it was a symbol of perseverance, dignity, and belonging. Yet on this very evening, that sense of belonging was about to be challenged in a way no one could have imagined. Without warning, smoke began rising from the Daniels home. The smell of burning wood filled the air, and within minutes, orange flames licked at the roof. Neighbors screamed, children were rushed indoors, and someone dialed 911. The sound of sirens grew closer, promising relief. A fire truck, its lights flashing like a beacon of hope, turned the corner into the neighborhood. But then, something unthinkable happened. The truck slowed to a stop, halted not by the flames but by a locked steel gate at the neighborhood entrance, a gate installed and controlled by the homeowners association. The firefighters jumped out, trying to force it open, but the reinforced barrier wouldn't budge. Behind them, precious minutes ticked away, and in front of them, a family's home continued to burn. This wasn't an accident. The HOA had insisted on the gate as a form of community protection, but tonight, that very decision had turned into a weapon. And as Mr. Daniels watched the red lights flashing helplessly at the entrance, he realized this was no different from a blockade, one that stripped him of his right to safety, his right to dignity, his right to simply live in peace. The crowd gathered at the gate, confusion spreading as quickly as the flames. Neighbors whispered, some gasped in disbelief, but no one dared challenge the rule that kept the fire truck locked out. The HOA president, a stern woman in her 60s, arrived on the scene, clutching a keycard. She moved slowly, deliberately, as though unaware that every second meant the difference between salvage and destruction. Her voice, cold and distant, echoed, "Procedures are procedures. The fire department should have coordinated access in advance." The word stung. It wasn't just about a burning house, it was about an attitude that turned rules into shackles, bureaucracy into cruelty. For Mr. Daniels, the symbolism was unmistakable. He had seen this before, not in flames, but in the silent ways doors were closed to people who looked like him, in boardrooms, in classrooms, and now in his own neighborhood. The blockade before him was more than steel, it was history repeating itself. The firefighters shouted in frustration, trying to ram the gate with their truck, but the barrier held. Inside, the Daniels' living room collapsed with a deafening roar. His wife clutched his arm, their children crying in terror as smoke darkened the sky. Some neighbors filmed on their phones, capturing not just the fire, but the quiet injustice of an institution prioritizing control over humanity. In international law, cutting off humanitarian relief, blocking aid from reaching the suffering, is condemned as a crime. Nations are held accountable when they starve people of food, water, or medicine. Yet here, in a wealthy American suburb, the same principle played out in miniature. A family was being starved of rescue, blockaded not by enemies of war, but by the very association sworn to protect community interests. By the time the gate finally creaked open, after desperate fumbling and bureaucratic hesitation, the fire had grown monstrous. Flames towered into the night, windows shattered with explosive bursts, and the once proud Daniels home was reduced to a skeleton of glowing beams. The firefighters rushed in valiantly, but they were no longer racing to save a home. They were racing to contain a disaster. Mr. Daniels stood in the street, his arms around his children, as neighbors watched silently. Some offered sympathy in hushed voices, others avoided his gaze. The HOA president muttered about protocol and community safety, her words sounding hollow against the crackle of burning wood. For the Daniels family, there was no safety left, only ashes. That night, reporters arrived. The story spread quickly: HOA blocks firefighters, family loses home. Social media erupted with outrage. But beneath the headlines lay a deeper truth: one not everyone dared to speak. To Mr. Daniels, this wasn't just a story about rules gone wrong. It was about how systems designed to protect often end up punishing those who don't fit the mold. His house wasn't the first to burn from neglect, but it was a reminder that dignity could be stripped not only by fire, but by indifference. As dawn broke, the Daniels family sifted through the charred remains. A scorched family Bible. A melted photograph frame. A child's toy, blackened but still intact. These were not just objects, they were pieces of identity, fragments of a life built through perseverance. And now, those fragments told a story of how injustice can masquerade as order, how cruelty can hide behind the polished language of rules. The community began to divide. Some residents demanded accountability, arguing that no rule should ever stand in the way of saving lives. Others, however, quietly defended the HOA, suggesting that rules exist for a reason, and that the Daniels family was simply unlucky. To Mr. Daniels, these whispers cut deeper than the flames. They revealed how injustice often thrives, not through open hostility, but through silence and complicity. He knew the weight of being seen as an outsider, even when standing on his own front lawn. For years, he had paid his dues, attended meetings, and abided by regulations. Yet when the moment of truth arrived, the system showed where its loyalties lay. The blockade wasn't just steel, it was a message: your safety, your home, your dignity, are conditional. Legal experts weighed in on the news, calling the HOA's actions reckless. Some even drew parallels to international law, pointing out how blockades that prevent humanitarian aid are condemned because they weaponize suffering. The Daniels case was smaller in scale, but the principle was the same. A family in need was denied relief because power valued procedure over humanity. Through it all, Mr. Daniels refused to crumble. Standing among the ashes, he held his head high. "We lost our home," he told a reporter, his voice steady, "but we didn't lose our pride. This was wrong, and the world needs to know it." His words carried weight because they weren't just about one fire, they were about every unseen blockade that Black families face, from locked gates to locked opportunities. The fire had stolen their house, but it had also lit a flame in the community's conscience, forcing people to confront the quiet cruelty of rules that forget their humanity. In the weeks that followed, the Daniels family became a symbol. Activists rallied around their story, demanding reforms to HOA policies across the state. Petitions circulated, lawmakers debated, and communities everywhere began questioning, what is the purpose of rules if they cannot bend to protect life? For Mr. Daniels, the journey was not just about rebuilding a home but reclaiming dignity. His children, once traumatized by the flames, began to see their father's courage in every news broadcast, every town hall meeting where he stood tall and spoke with conviction. He reminded them, and the world, that tragedy does not define us, how we rise from it does. The memory of that night never faded. The roar of the fire, the flashing red lights held at bay, the cold face of authority insisting on procedure. Yet, intertwined with that memory was another, the resilience of a family that refused to be silenced, the strength of a man who turned ashes into testimony. International law condemns blockades that cut off aid because they rob people of their humanity. What happened to the Daniels family was a blockade in its purest form, not on seas or borders, but in a neighborhood where justice was supposed to live. Their story became proof that dignity is not granted by rules, it is claimed through courage. And so, when Mr. Daniels stood once more on the empty lot where his home once stood, he did not bow his head in defeat. Instead, he looked forward, his voice carrying across the quiet street, "They tried to block the fire truck. They tried to block our hope. But we are still here. And we will not be blockaded again." The fire destroyed walls, but it built something stronger: truth, courage, and an unshakable demand for justice.